Hi everyone, it's Gary Nicholson here for weatherweb.net. Now, a lot of talk today about supertides in the various media. You've probably come across it and you've seen some of our tweets as well here at weatherweb.net. Now, I'm just going to have a look through some of the details of this and how these occur and what they're all about in a little video for you. Bearing in mind, of course, that keeping things into context, just remember how last winter we had some very high tides combining with very stormy conditions. So I think getting really excited about these high seas and the highest for 20 years or whatever is being quoted, just keep into context and bear in mind what we have seen in recent times, and remember that when you see all the various news stories. Now, first of all, we're not going to use the word super tide because that's not looking at things very technically. Spring tides, high spring tides is what we've got. Nothing to do with the season of spring, that's a common misconception. Spring tides are when higher than normal high tides occur and lower than normal low tides occur at any one time. This is at times or just after the periods of new and full moon, when the Earth, moon and the sun are all in alignment. Imagine this looking down from above the Earth's pole. And just to add that at the times of the equinox, so around March and around September, the alignment of the Earth and the Sun a little bit stronger at that time will just add something to the height of the spring tides, but nonetheless that's nothing to do with the naming of this particular feature. And the contrast to that, of course, is neap tides, where the opposite is true. You get lower than normal high tides and higher than normal low tides, so the range is much smaller during any tidal cycle. This happens around or just after the point of half moons. So again, effectively this diagram is looking down on the Earth from above the pole and showing the moon at 90 degrees to the sun. So the two sort of bodies cancelling each other out to some extent and creating a lower tidal pull. Now, additional to all of that, we've got the distance of the moon to the Earth, which is a factor important in the height of these spring tides. The moon's orbit around the Earth is in an oval shape, so moving from a point close to the Earth to further away, perigee to apogee, over the course of its 1 month orbit. And it's when those two factors come together that you have the distance of the moon to the Earth combining with the phase and coming together to produce stronger than normal tidal pull. So at the moment we've got a new moon and perigee point together, so those two combined allow for an even greater enhancement of the spring tide effect. This will vary over the course of the year. Over around 2 or 3 months at a time you'll get the new moon, for example, at the point of perigee more or less to within a day. And over around a 6 month period, 6 to 7 months, the perigee point just moves around the orbit and eventually comes around to the period of full moon. So you'll get that a few months afterwards, around 6-7 months time. Now, one additional factor to add in is the positions relative of the moon, the Earth and the sun all together. Now, the Earth orbits the sun around the ecliptics, the plane of which the Earth orbits the sun. And effectively, the moon orbits the Earth around this plane as well. So not the equator, but around this ecliptic plane. Not quite, though. It's inclined at 5 degrees to it. And over a period of around 18 to 19 years, the moon sort of wobbles around the Earth's orbit and becomes slightly higher in the sky at its highest point and slightly lower in the sky at its lowest point over this period of time. Now, at the moment, the moon is almost on the ecliptical plane, so it's back sort of lined up, if you like, with the Earth, moon and sun all together. And these factors all sort of lining up at this point in time, as it will do over this rough 18 to 19 year cycle. It's just one more influence in the spring tide effect, just giving a little bit more of a push, but the effect of that is becoming increasingly small as these factors add together. Now, just by way of an example, with showing you some of the highest tides, this is the predicted astronomical tide, so taking away any weather or wave impacts. This is for Avonmouth, so on the Severn Estuary, so using it as an example, that the proportional values will be similar to other areas, but the heights of the tide different in your different coastal locations. Now, highlighted, we've got this weekend then, Saturday 21st of February, at 14.5 metres shown as the highest point of the high tide. And the other dates are just the top points of the high spring tides at their various points through the year. We've got, by comparison, the 7th of February. Now, this was at last full moon, so when we had a spring tide, but this was at the point of apogee. So the high spring tide there, the highest shown on the 7th, that bit lower than we are now. And compare with what we're going to have on the 22nd of March, predicted as very similar to what we've got now, again near to 14.5 metres. As we go forward, just have a look down into August and September. End of August and as we go through into September, the predicted high astronomical spring tide will be at around 14.5 metres once again, peaking overall, by the looks of it, at the end of September. At that time, we're going to have full moon and perigee together, and also it's quite near to the equinox, so those factors that we've seen so far coming together. Now, just looking quickly at some previous years, these were the highest spring tides, at least on the prediction from last year on the astronomical factors for Avonmouth, and showing not too dissimilar really, a little bit lower on some of them than what we've got currently, but at their peak, when the new or the full moon was at the time of perigee, again, not too far off where we are, around 14.5 metres at the absolute peak. Compare that with 2011. Now this time we've got the point of new or full moon and perigee, all quite close to the equinox again at this time. And again, the top spring tides not too dissimilar to where we are now. So any reference to these being the highest in 20 years or anything, really take it into context that even in recent times, the high spring tides, the highest ones of all, not too dissimilar to where we are now. And you're talking a matter of centimetres between them. Of course, different ports, different harbours, different coastal locations. Your values are a bit different, but proportionally, you're more or less the same as these, even though the numbers may be lower. Now, just looking back to 2006, that was when we were last almost at a situation in the moon's orbit similar to now, and again the values are more or less the same, peaking out at their tops near to 14.5 metres at Avonmouth, similar to 2007. Going back to 2002, so again a similar situation where the perigee moon was around the equinox, and again just over 14.5 metres. And 1997, if you want to pick an absolute height, it looks as though 14.68 in September 97 was the highest, but again we're talking a matter of tens of centimetres, around 10 centimetres different from the absolute highs we're seeing at this time. And again, these are the predicted values rather than anything observed. Now, just as one additional point then, as well as the astronomical tides, which are driven by the position of the moon and the sun, we've got some pretty big swells coming in off the Atlantic as well. Now, these charts off the sailing section of weatherweb.net, you can get them if you look on the menu bar at the top of the page. Now, this just cycling this through over the course of the weekend, and you'll notice coming in from the west, as the colours change, the height of the swell changing as we go towards Saturday and particularly through into Sunday as low pressure deepens out towards the west of Britain, driving in a very high swell, so some high waves on top of what is a high tide, although by the time we're going to early next week, the peak of the tides is lowering somewhat. But that said, the high waves and the swell coming in with the stormy conditions will be increasing, and shown here as around a 14-metre swell out in the Atlantic, and that will just drive into some of these western areas and add some high waves to the coastlines. I think by the time the worst of this comes in, the peak of the tides may just have passed, but nonetheless they'll still be pretty high, and it's enough just to cause some concern for coastal areas, for some low-lying coastal estuaries as well, and around some seafronts for some overtopping of waves, and one just to be aware of if you are in these areas. So it's all those things we have to consider then. It's the combination of the moon and the sun and the position of all those, as we saw, combined with the weather situation and the low pressure and the swell coming in off the Atlantic, that all add together to create high seas. And don't take anything away, these are quite high tides. These are almost the highest you'll get this year, and some of the highest over the past 4 or 5 years. But when we're talking about a 20-year period, you have to bear in mind that the difference between some of the highest of the high spring tides is not that great. I mean, over different locations, slight differences will occur, but we just need to keep into context the difference over time when we're relating these stories. I hope that's been a useful video for you and you found it useful and informative. Don't say that covers everything there is to say about the tides, the moon and everything, because there's a wealth of a subject in there, but hope that's given you some insight into what's happening at the moment in these so-called super tides. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.